Hello and welcome back to my channel if this is your first time here. Hi, I'm Cassie. If it's not, thanks for always tuning into my videos. Today we're in a different little setup. We are chilling in my bed. I wanted to go over my stats for the year, and I got my last jab, my most recent jab, I guess, like the third booster vaccine for COVID a couple hours ago, and so my arm is sore. Didn't really want to record, so I was like, you know what, let's just set it up in my bed. I'm cozy, I'm literally in my pajamas, and we're just going along with it, so sorry if this isn't the quality you expect from me, because this is just me. Well, last year I used the Cop Aisle spreadsheet, which is a spreadsheet by G, Book Roast, on YouTube, and it tracks all my stats. I will be popping stats on the screen somewhere here as we go so that you can kind of look at things. This year I read a total of 80 books. This does not include any DNFs. I just wipe DNFs from my memory and I don't include them. I do know I DNF'd probably about 5 to 10 books this year. So if we're looking at my monthly stats, the best reading month I had was in October, which was 12 books I read that month, and my worst was February, which I only read 2. The thing with this is if I'm actually looking at the most I read, I will have to look at page count, and so when I'm looking at page count, in October I only read 4,251 pages, where in September I read 5,088 pages, even though I only read 7 books. So in October I was reading a ton of horror books, which are a lot shorter than the chunky fantasy I typically read, so that's why we have that. My next highest was in August, I believe, where I read 4,394 pages, where I only read 9 books, so not that bad. I had 2 months where I slumped, which were February, where I read 2, and November, where I read 3. In February, I only read 828 pages. In November, I still read 1,890 pages. I would say both of those came out of months where I read a lot of books. Even though in January I only read 6 books, I was only reading about 3 to 4 books a month before January. So I'd really pushed myself in January because I had made my goal 72 books, which was 6 books a month. So I pushed myself to read 6, and I remember I slumped so hard in February after that. But then I really got a groove on, and I typically read what I needed to. Only in April also did I not read 6. So my total pages read this year were 37,506. That is a pretty good page count, in my opinion. Some other interesting stats are obviously my genre. I read 77.5% fantasy, not a shock to anyone, with my second biggest category being horror, where I read 8.8%. I would like this to be bigger. I read 7 horror books versus 62 fantasy books. Other genres on here are science fiction, 6.3, and then thriller, where I read 5%, and then in the little spots I read 1 romance and I read 1 nonfiction. I'm pretty happy. I don't mind that I'm reading about 75% fantasy, but I would like horror to go up, and I do still enjoy reading a couple sci-fi and thrillers, so maybe if I can get my fantasy to about 65% next year, that would be a good place to be at. Let's go to star rating before I do book length. So for star ratings, I gave out 19% 5 stars. I gave out 15. I gave out 28 4 stars, which is 35.4%, and then I gave out 27 3 stars, 34.2%, 8 2 stars, 10%, and 1 1 star, 1.3%. So most of my reading is between 4 and 3 stars. I am quite happy with that. I obviously would like to bump it up a little bit more so that I have a little bit less 3 stars, but for me a 3 star is still a good book. I have a video on how I rate books up on my channel if you are interested in knowing just like how I review things and what matters to me, and so you will know, for example, that I'm harsher on my 5 stars and I don't give them out as often. So 4 being my main category, I am not mad at all. A little less A little less 3 stars though would be okay. If we're looking at the length of the books read, I don't really like the graph that Cawpile makes me, so I'm going to point that Cawpile graph out on here. If I can figure out how to make a graph myself, I will make you a graph on how I have looked at the averages, or looked at the stats for my books read. I just find this graph very confusing, because it goes by 50s. So I have calculated it to like big books, small books, and average books. Most people, I think, count a big book as over 500 pages, so that's what I did. I read 36.5% of my reading was over 500 pages, and then a small book, which is less than 300 pages, was 15.1%, and a 300 to 500 page book, I think this is an average book, is 48.4%. I definitely lean towards the chunkier book, which I knew. I don't really necessarily enjoy a smaller book as much, specifically fantasy based. When it comes to my horror novels and my thriller books, I do want them to be about 200 to 350 pages, roughly. Anything less than 200 is probably too small for me. So I am happy with like leaning towards chunkier books. I know I really, really enjoy those chunky fantasies. So I'm hoping next year I actually will have more bigger books, and most I think of the smaller ones are because they're YA, and I'm leaning heavily towards adult versus YA, I think, coming into the new year. So I do think that I will see a decrease in that next year. If we are going into my age category, as like we just kind of talked about it, I read 56.3% adult. I read 45 adult books. 25.0% YA, 20 YA books. 5% were middle grade, 4 middle grade books, and I read 11 new adult books, 13.8%. New adult is kind of iffy. I probably put books that other people wouldn't think as new adult in here, so new adult is a little bit of a confusing genre. I think I put A Court of Thorns and Roses in there, and From Blood and Ash. Some of those fantasy romance books that read a little bit younger in my opinion, but have obviously adult scenes going into them. The publication year is again another chart that kind of my mind just does not wrap around very easily, but it's not as important as your book count, page count. So I read mostly releases from 2020, which I kind of thought was interesting. I'm a little bit behind on the times. I only read 13.8% 2021, which is new releases, and then most of my books were from beyond that. And I'm just going to put the graph on here so you can see if you want to look it up, because there is a wide range. And I don't think that'll change. I read what I want to read. Lots of it is fantasy series that are older, so I probably will continue to not read as many new releases, but I also do read a lot from the year before, because I am behind on the times and on the trends. My LGBTQIA+ representation, I am not very good at specifically seeking these out. It's not something I do majorly, which I've been slowly trying to get better, but I do think the fact that I read 51.3% of my books, 41 books were absent, and then so about 50% was present, is a great feat for publishing, considering I am not actively seeking those out. Now, the thing is, this is also now broken into 30% I have put as present and 18.8% main character. I would love to see my main character go up, because if it's present, it could be something super small. I know that in the second Polar Bears Explorers Club, it's just mentioned right at the end that the father is gay, and so that is present for me. It's not a big part of the story though. But I'm afraid that this is going to go down, because I know I have a lot of white male written chunky fantasy series that have been written 10 years ago that I want to read, and so I'm scared that'll go down, but I think I'm going to try to be better at actively seeking this out to try and offset that white man stat. But I do think that we're showing a change in publishing, that I am seeing it more often in books, and I love that. Then if we're looking at series versus standalone, I read 80% series, 64 books, and 20% standalone, which is 16%. I'm actually shocked that I read so many standalones. So this stat probably shocks me more than anything else, because I love a series. Standalones just don't tend to do it for me. I think most of these standalones come from either horror or thrillers, although one of these needs to be changed because I just found out that A Clown in the Cornfield has a sequel coming, so it is no longer a standalone, it will be part of a series. I finished 8 series this year. Most of these are probably kind of false, because if you've heard me talk about it before, every time I finish a Robin Hobb trilogy, I mark it off as a series finished, even though I'm not finished the entire Realm of the Elderlings. So, Farseer, Ship of Magic, wow. Farseer, Live Ships, and The Tawny Man are all 3 of these series that I completed. And I started a lot more than I finished. Another one that I am not really good at is POC author. I read 77.5% not POC. That's 62 books, and 22.5% were POC. It's another thing that I don't actively search out for, and I realize that that's not good. And I want to really work on this. I am impressed with how much I have done without actively seeking it out, because, again, the fantasy genre is flooded full of old white men as writers, and I love lots of those series, but my favorite series of all times, the Poppy War and the Day of Veg trilogy, are written by women of color, so I definitely should seek this out more and more. I do know that there are a lot of women of color on my shelves that I want to read, I believe, so there are some that I want, I just haven't gotten around to, but I am hoping that I can make this 50 and 50 next year. I think that that would be great. So again, I'm going to probably try to offset some of that white men by actively seeking it out. And then I do have the stats for if they're written by men, women, or not specified. The problem with this is that I am lazy. This is a stat that I at one point was reading only men, so I was tracking it because I wanted to read more women, and really I started actively searching out women in fantasy. So I do have the stat, I can put it up here, but the problem is that I don't really go searching, and that's wrong for me to do because there are a lot of people that are non-binary, and I just kind of assumed gender for most of these, and that's really bad of me. And so I want to, if I continue with this stat, I'm going to be actively better at searching genders, but also this is something that people aren't always as open about. So yeah, I pretty much wanted this stat just to see that I was reading more women, and I read 73.8% from women this year. 23.8% were man, and then there were 2 that one was non-binary and one was not specified. And those are all like the stats I have on here. I'm gonna pull up Goodreads really quickly because I do also enjoy the Goodreads stats. My 2021 year in books. The shortest book I read this year was Nothing But Black and Teeth by Cassandra Khaw, which was 128 pages, and then the longest book I read this year was The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, which was 915 pages. My average book length in 2021 is 464 pages. This is about where I thought it would be. My most popular book was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. My least popular was Kingdom of Essence by Holly Carlson, which I was gifted by the author. Average rating was 3.6. My highest rated book that I read, so not that I highest rated it, but like just the book I read this year with the most ratings on Goodreads, is A Court of Mist and Fury. And my first review of the year went to Fortuna Sworn, which was a 2-star read. It's not the first book I read this year, but it's the first one that I wrote down a review for. Interesting. Okay, I also, in one of my videos, talked about how I wanted to see if, after I read a 5-star book, if the book I read right after was lowered because I had such a good book. Specifically, when I'm talking about 1 stars, I would like to see if I read a 5-star before that, like a 1 or 2 stars. So I'm just going to scroll quickly through Cawpile and see. So I don't necessarily think it's a trend, but I do think if I pick up a book that I didn't like, so like I read The Nature of Witches after a 5-star, and I really think I hated that. And part of that is because I can notice the flaws after reading a book that I really, really did like. I don't think I necessarily would have liked the book if I had read it at a different time, but I think it helps me notice things, maybe. Because yeah, it's not really a huge trend, but it is a thing that's kind of in there, and I think it's just kind of cool to look at. The year before, I tried really, really hard to diverse my reading genres, and this year I just accepted fantasy as my favorite genre, and the one I'm going to get the most 5 stars from, the one I'm going to love the most, I'm going to enjoy them. It's going to push me to read more books in a month because I'm reading books I love and I'm getting through them really quickly. And I am proud of myself for doing that, and I used to think that to be a good reader, I had to read so diversely, and I have thrown that out the window. Read what you like. Reading's for enjoyment. Read whatever you like. Don't let someone tell you that you're not a reader because you're not reading what they think reading is. Anyways, yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoy stats videos. They are very intriguing to me, and it's just like a way to look upon your reading of the year, especially because you don't remember everything, and just make some plans for the new year's that aren't necessarily goals, but they're things that I would like to work towards. Thank you so much for chilling with me in bed, for watching. If you made it all the way to the end of this video and you would like to leave a comment down below but you have nothing to say, you can leave me a writing utensil emoji. I think there's a pencil emoji. Because we talked stats. Have a wonderful day, guys. I'm going to put some videos on the screen that I think you would enjoy.